Can one actor really destroy an entire sci-fi blockbuster? Hollywood will blame bad scripts, confusing marketing, weak effects, or franchise fatigue. But sometimes the face in the center of the screen becomes the real disaster. These films had huge worlds, expensive visuals, and big ambitions, yet one performance became the thing audiences could not forgive. Some were miscast, some looked bored, and one nearly turned a studio's dream into a warning label. The host, Max Irons, 2013. A love triangle can save a weak sci-fi story, but only if one side of the triangle has actual fire. The host arrived with a built-in advantage. It came from Stephen E. Meyer, the author behind Twilight, and Hollywood clearly hoped lightning would strike twice. The idea had promise. Earth has been taken over by alien souls who live inside human bodies, while a young woman fights to protect her identity, her memories, and the people she loves. That should have been emotional gold. But Max Irons, playing Jared, became one of the film's biggest problems because the role needed obsession, danger, pain, and romantic intensity. Instead, his performance often feels too polished, too blank, and too emotionally safe. Jared is supposed to be the human connection strong enough to pull the heroine back from alien control, but Irons never fully sells that magnetic pull. His scenes should burn with desperation. Too often, they just sit there. Saoirse Ronan works hard to give the film inner conflict, but the romance around her feels underpowered. The result is a sci-fi romance with a huge emotional concept and a surprisingly weak heartbeat. The alien invasion did not kill this movie. The lack of romantic electricity did. Ender's Game, Asa Butterfield, 2013. Some heroes are supposed to look young, but they still have to feel dangerous. Ender's Game had one of the most fascinating sci-fi setups imaginable. A gifted child is trained through war games to become the commander humanity needs against an alien threat. The story is not really about lasers or spaceships. It is about pressure, manipulation, genius, and the terrifying cost of turning a child into a weapon. That is why Asa Butterfield's casting was so risky. He had the intelligence in his eyes and the fragile look of a boy forced into an adult nightmare, but the performance rarely becomes commanding enough to make Ender feel legendary. The movie keeps telling us he is special. It keeps telling us other students fear him, adults study him, and the future depends on him. But on screen, his presence often feels too quiet, too internal, and too emotionally distant. Harrison Ford brings weight as the military authority figure, and the battle room sequences have visual imagination, but the center never explodes the way it should. Ender should feel like a child genius becoming something frightening. Instead, he often feels like a very serious student in an expensive simulation. The movie did not just need a young actor, it needed a young general. Geostorm, Gerard Butler, 2017. When the weather is destroying Earth, the lead actor cannot look like he wandered in from a different movie. Geostorm is one of those massive disaster spectacles built on a beautifully ridiculous idea. Humans create a satellite system to control the planet's climate, and then that same system starts attacking the world. Cities freeze, oceans rise, fire rains from the sky, and the fate of humanity depends on stopping a global weather machine. This kind of movie needs a very specific lead performance. Either the actor plays it with total dramatic conviction, making the madness feel real, or he embraces the wild B-movie energy and turns it into popcorn chaos. Gerard Butler lands somewhere awkwardly between both versions. He is rugged, serious, and physically believable, but his performance does not give the film the fun swagger it badly needs. As Jake Lawson, he should feel like the rebellious genius who can outsmart an orbiting apocalypse. Instead, he often feels tired, gruff, and strangely disconnected from the scale of the disaster. The effects are loud, the stakes are huge, and the script is already silly. But Butler does not elevate the material. He grounds it so heavily that the absurdity becomes boring instead of entertaining. In a movie about killer weather, the biggest storm should have been charisma. Life, Jake Gyllenhaal, 2017. A killer alien can only terrify us if the humans around it feel painfully alive. Life had all the ingredients for a brutal, modern space horror thriller. A cramped space station, a mysterious organism from Mars, a crew trapped above Earth, and the slow realization that their scientific discovery is smarter, stronger, and far more dangerous than they imagined. On paper, it sounds like the perfect mix of alien, gravity, and pure survival panic. Jake Gyllenhaal, one of the strongest actors of his generation, seemed like a major advantage. But that is also what makes his performance so frustrating. As Dr. David Jordan, he plays the role with a muted, almost withdrawn sadness that may fit the character's backstory, but it does not always serve the movie's tension. Space horror needs escalating fear, it needs panic under pressure, it needs emotional fractures as the situation becomes impossible. Gyllenhaal often feels too controlled, too quiet, too sealed off from the nightmare unfolding around him. The alien creature, Calvin, becomes the most expressive presence in the film, which is not exactly ideal when the human cast should be carrying the dread. Life is slick, tense, and nasty in places, but its emotional temperature stays colder than it should. The monster worked. The human heartbeat did not. The Darkest Hour, Emil Hirsch, 2011. Invisible aliens are a great idea, unless the lead performance disappears first. The Darkest Hour had a clever survival hook. Young Americans in Moscow are caught in an alien invasion where the attackers are made of energy, nearly impossible to see, and capable of reducing people to ash. That concept should have created paranoia, panic, and constant visual tension. Every street, every shadow, every flicker of light could have become a death trap. But for a movie built around survival fear, Emil Hirsch never gives the story the strong central force it needs. He plays Sean with a casual, low-energy style that might work in a smaller indie drama, but here it makes the end of the world feel strangely weightless. The character should evolve from ordinary visitor to desperate survivor, but Hirsch's performance rarely gives that transformation enough urgency. The surrounding cast also struggles, and the script does not give anyone much depth, but the lead actor has to make the audience care when everything else is thin. Instead, Sean often feels like a passenger inside his own apocalypse. The alien threat looks interesting. The Moscow setting gives the film a different flavor, and the premise has real potential. But when the hero feels this forgettable, even invisible monsters start to look more memorable. Robocop, Joel Kinnaman, 2014. Remaking Robocop without a haunted soul at the center is like building a machine and forgetting the man inside it. The original Robocop worked because Peter Weller did not just play a cyborg. He played a murdered man trapped inside corporate technology, fighting to recover pieces of his stolen humanity. That pain is why the satire, violence, and futuristic police-state nightmare had emotional power. The 2014 remake had sleek visuals, bigger technology, and a more modern political surface. But Joel Kinnaman's Alex Murphy never becomes as tragic or unforgettable as he needs to be. Kinnaman is not bad in a simple sense. He is controlled, physical, and believable as a man turned into a weapon. But the performance feels too clean, too restrained, and too emotionally narrow for a story that should feel like a body horror identity crisis. The movie wants us to feel the terror of a husband and father losing ownership of his own body. Yet too many scenes feel like a polished action drama instead of a nightmare. Michael Keaton, Gary Oldman, and Samuel L. Jackson bring energy around him, but the center remains colder than intended. Robocop did not fail because the suit changed. It failed because the ghost inside the suit never truly screamed. Alita, Battle Angel, Kean Johnson, 2019. A cyborg warrior can carry the action, but a weak love interest can quietly drain the soul out of the machine. Alita. Battle Angel had no shortage of spectacle. It gave audiences a neon-dirty future, brutal motorball violence, floating cities, cybernetic bodies, and a heroine who actually felt alive beneath all that digital wizardry. Rosa Salazar gave Alita innocence, rage, wonder, and hunger, everything the movie needed from its central creation. But then, the story asks us to believe that Alita's emotional world is deeply tied to Hugo, played by Kean Johnson, and that is where the film begins to wobble. Hugo is supposed to be charming enough to tempt her, dangerous enough to complicate her, and tragic enough to break her heart. Instead, Johnson often feels too plain, too soft, and too emotionally lightweight for the mythic romance the movie is trying to build. His scenes with Alita are not terrible, but they rarely generate the kind of heat needed to justify her devotion. In a world full of killers, bounty hunters, body thieves, and impossible technology, Hugo should feel like a human anchor. Instead, he becomes the weakest part of the emotional design. The action dazzles, the world fascinates, but the love story lands with a thud, and for a movie built around a mechanical girl discovering human feeling, that is a serious wound. The creator, John David Washington, 2023. The future looked breathtaking, but the man standing in the middle of it often felt strangely unreachable. The creator arrived with one of the most visually impressive sci-fi worlds of recent years. Cities scarred by war, machines treated like people, children caught inside political hatred, and artificial intelligence presented not just as technology, but as a persecuted civilization. It had the ingredients for a modern classic: moral conflict, haunting imagery, and a fatherly bond at the center of a global war. But John David Washington's performance as Joshua became a major issue because the film depends almost entirely on grief. This is a man who has lost love, lost faith, and is forced to protect a childlike AI weapon who may change the world. That should be emotionally explosive. Instead, Washington plays much of it with a closed, guarded, almost flat intensity. His silence makes sense on paper, but on screen, it often creates distance where the movie needs connection. The young actress Madeleine Yuna Voiles brings softness and mystery as Alfie, and the world around them feels huge and tragic. But Joshua never fully becomes the emotional doorway into that world. The film asks us to feel heartbreak through him, yet he keeps us locked outside. The creator did not lack imagination. It lacked a lead performance powerful enough to make its beautiful war feel personal. 65. Adam Driver, 2023. A man with a laser gun fighting dinosaurs should not feel this tired. 65 had one of the easiest hooks to sell in modern sci-fi. Adam Driver crash lands on prehistoric Earth and must survive among dinosaurs while protecting a young girl. That sentence alone sounds like a thrilling pulp adventure, the kind of movie that could mix survival horror, creature attacks, and old-school Saturday night tension. But the final film is much colder and smaller than the concept promised, and Driver's performance is a big reason why. He plays Mills as a grieving pilot carrying guilt, exhaustion, and emotional damage, which gives the character seriousness. The problem is that the movie needed more than seriousness. It needed danger, desperation, personality, and a little raw movie star electricity. Driver spends much of the film grimacing, whispering, limping, and staring into the wilderness like a man trapped in a very expensive therapy session. His bond with the young survivor has moments of tenderness, but the language barrier keeps their relationship restrained, and Driver's heavy sadness makes the pace feel even slower. The dinosaurs should be terrifying, but because the human drama stays so muted, the attacks start to feel mechanical. 65 was not destroyed by bad effects or a confusing premise. It was weakened by a lead performance that treated a wild dinosaur thriller like a funeral march. Replicas, Keanu Reeves, 2018. Forbidden science needs obsession, not a man who sounds mildly inconvenienced by resurrection. Replicas had a juicy sci-fi premise. A brilliant scientist loses his family in a car crash, then secretly uses cloning and mind transfer technology to bring them back. That is dark material. It should feel desperate, unethical, terrifying, and emotionally messy. A man trying to defeat death should look like he is tearing reality apart with grief. But Keanu Reeves, as William Foster, gives a performance that often feels stiff in the exact places where the movie needs panic and madness. Reeves has been great in many roles, especially when his stillness becomes mythic or physical. But here, that same stillness works against the story. His line delivery can feel oddly flat, even when the character is lying, experimenting, hiding bodies, or making morally horrifying choices. Instead of a scientist collapsing under guilt, he sometimes feels like an employee dealing with a stressful software update. The supporting cast tries to create urgency, and the premise has the bones of a disturbing techno-thriller, but the emotional reality never catches fire. The movie wants us to believe love pushed this man beyond every ethical boundary. Reeves rarely makes that obsession feel dangerous enough. Replicas should have been a nightmare about grief and technology. Instead, it became a strange lesson in how even cloning cannot revive a dead performance. Transcendence, Johnny Depp, 2014. A movie about digital immortality should feel alive before the hero becomes a computer. Transcendence came with an enormous idea. What if a dying genius uploaded his consciousness into an artificial intelligence and slowly became something beyond human control? That premise touches fear, love, ego, technology, and the terrifying question of whether saving a person's mind might create a god. With Johnny Depp in the lead, the film should have had mystery and magnetism. Instead, his performance as Dr. Will Castor feels strangely drained from the beginning. Depp plays him as soft-spoken, distant, and emotionally dim, which might be intended to suggest intellectual detachment, but it also gives the audience very little to hold on to. Before Will becomes a digital presence, we need to understand why his wife loves him, why the world fears him, and why his mind is powerful enough to change civilization. Depp never fully sells that genius or that danger. After the upload, the performance becomes even colder, and the central question, is this still a man or something else pretending to be one, loses its dramatic charge. Rebecca Hall works hard to supply the emotion, but she is acting opposite a character who often feels more like a concept than a person. Transcendence had a brilliant nightmare inside it. Depp's sleepy, sealed-off performance kept that nightmare from waking up. The Island of Dr. Moreau, Marlon Brando, 1996. Sometimes a legend does not rescue a disaster. Sometimes he becomes the disaster everyone remembers. The Island of Dr. Moreau came from a disturbing sci-fi idea about genetic experiments, god complexes, and beast-human creatures trapped on a remote island. But the production was already falling apart before audiences ever saw it. Directors changed, egos clashed, weather caused problems, and the set became famous for chaos. Then Marlon Brando arrived as Dr. Moreau and turned the movie into something even stranger. Instead of playing him as a terrifying scientist controlling nature, Brando appeared in pale robes, strange makeup, and bizarre accessories, speaking with a soft, wandering rhythm that made the character feel less frightening than confusing. Every scene with him feels like the story pauses so a Hollywood legend can perform his own private dream. Val Kilmer adds more unstable energy, and the monster designs still have grotesque potential. But Brando's choices dominate everything. The movie should be about science, without ethics and creation turning against its creator. Instead, viewers remember the odd costumes, the strange delivery, and the feeling that nobody was controlling the film anymore. Brando was one of cinema's greatest actors, but here, greatness became gravity. He did not anchor the island. He pulled it under. That is the tragedy. Hollywood rarely looked this broken very painfully clearly. Megalopolis, Adam Driver, 2024. A futuristic epic needs one human heartbeat, and Megalopolis often gives us a marble statue delivering prophecy. Francis Ford Coppola's long-dreamed sci-fi project arrived carrying decades of ambition, huge philosophical ideas, and the weight of a filmmaker trying to say something enormous about cities, corruption, power, art, and civilization itself. Adam Driver plays Caesar Catalina, a visionary architect who wants to rebuild society with a mysterious material and a radical belief in a better future. On paper, Driver sounds perfect, intense, unusual, serious, and capable of making strange men feel wounded and dangerous. But the performance often becomes another layer of confusion instead of the emotional guide the movie desperately needs. Caesar should feel magnetic enough for people to follow, dangerous enough for enemies to fear, and human enough for viewers to care. Too often, Driver plays him like a man trapped inside a grand speech nobody else can fully understand. His pauses, theatrical delivery, and heavy seriousness make the character feel important, but not always alive. The film's sets, politics, and visual ambition keep demanding emotional clarity, yet the center remains distant. Megalopolis may be bold, expensive, and deeply personal, but big ideas cannot survive on architecture alone. They need blood, desire, and danger. Driver gives commitment, but the revolution never fully breathes. And that gap hurts badly today. Morbius, Jared Leto, 2022. A vampire anti-hero should feel cursed, seductive, and dangerous. Morbius often feels like a man practicing seriousness in a mirror. Jared Leto plays Dr. Michael Morbius, a brilliant scientist suffering from a rare blood disease who experiments with bat DNA and accidentally transforms himself into a living vampire. That premise has real pulp power. It could have been a creepy mix of body horror, superhero tragedy, and mad science obsession. But Leto's performance keeps the character trapped in a heavy, self-important fog. He whispers, stares, suffers, and moves through the film as if every moment is supposed to become iconic, yet the movie never gives him the emotional force to earn that attitude. Morbius should be terrifying because he is a healer becoming a predator. He should be tragic because his cure destroys the person he was trying to save. Instead, he often feels strangely blank, caught between monster movie and superhero origin story. The contrast becomes worse whenever Matt Smith appears, because Smith understands the ridiculous energy hiding inside the material and brings playful menace to his villain. Leto, meanwhile, keeps everything stiff and solemn. That gap helped turn Morbius into a meme. The film needed a nightmare with hunger in its eyes. It got a brooding mood board with fangs, fog, and very little bite, and audiences noticed fast. The Marvels, Brie Larson, 2023. When a franchise is already losing heat, the lead star cannot feel like the most distant person in the room. The Marvels entered theaters under brutal pressure. Superhero fatigue was rising, Marvel's universe had become harder for casual viewers to follow, and Captain Marvel remained one of the studio's most debated heroes. Brie Larson had a difficult job. Carol Danvers needed to feel powerful, guilty, lonely, funny, wounded, and human while sharing the screen with Kamala Khan and Monica Rambeau. That balance could have made the film emotionally sharp. Instead, Larson's performance often feels too restrained for a story that desperately needs warmth and urgency. Carol is carrying the weight of cosmic mistakes and broken relationships, but the pain rarely lands with full force. Iman Vellani brings bright fan energy as Kamala, and Teyonah Parris gives Monica a grounded emotional edge, which makes Carol's cool distance stand out even more. The movie wants us to reconnect with her and believe she can anchor this chaotic cosmic adventure, yet she often feels sealed behind confidence instead of opened by regret. The Marvels had plenty of other problems, from rushed plotting to franchise baggage, but the central star needed to make audiences care again. In a universe built on connection, emotional distance became the real villain, and the box office proved it. So the next time Hollywood says a sci-fi flop failed because of marketing, remember the face at the center. Sometimes one actor cannot hold the weight of a universe, and millions disappear behind the performance. These films had worlds, weapons, monsters, and futures to sell, but one wrong casting choice turned ambition into warning. Now tell us, who was worst?